This is the beginning of the endocrine system. So we're going to talk about hormones and where they're released and how hormones have the effect on the body. And we're going to talk about the kind of most famous ones here. First off, the endocrine system works with the nervous system. So the nervous system is your short, rapid response of communication throughout your body, and your endocrine system is your slower response. Now, this doesn't mean that it takes years or months or days. It can be hours. But versus the nervous system that can be milliseconds, well, endocrine system is a lot longer. Nervous system also isn't short duration, meaning that it just all of a sudden happens and then it stops quickly. So it's a short acting communication. And just think about moving your muscles. So if you think about moving your muscle, your nervous system says contract and then it stops. So it can kind of be short. The endocrine system can be long duration, where it can kind of continue to communicate and have the responses for a long period of time. The nervous system has chemical communication along with its electrical communication, and that's going to be through neurotransmitters that are released in the synapse to communicate. Most of them are. Endocrine system is going to communicate with the chemical compound called hormones. So we're going to talk about the different types of hormones. And a major thing is neurotransmitters are released into the synapse of the neuron, so in between. Hormones are released directly into the blood, so they circulate. So they can be what we say diffuse locations because they go anywhere in the blood, they travel. The neurotransmitters are only communicating between neurons on the axon pathway. So it's not like a neurotransmitter can be released and then it goes to a nerve that's from, say, a neurotransmitter is released from a nerve in your leg. It can't go all of a sudden to your arm. Hormones, because they circulate in the blood, can go long distances where they can go from your pituitary gland all the way down to your adrenal glands, or they can have their target effect. So thyroid hormone goes everywhere. Every cell needs thyroid hormone, so they go over long distances. Neurotransmitters are just in that synapse, so teeny tiny distance. Endocrine system, the hormones are going to be majorly all the different types. This is just going to be changing metabolic activities. So it's whether we're building something, we're breaking it down, releasing, some things happening because of the hormones. And again, transported in blood. Again, slower but longer lasting. And we look at endocrinology is actual study of hormones and the endocrine organs, the ones that release the hormones. So if you go to an endocrinologist, you're having some sort of hormonal imbalance. Functions of the endocrine system. So it controls, meaning it manages and communicates between different systems. Reproduction is going to be a major one, and that's kind of classically what we think about when we talk about the endocrine system. A lot of this we're going to touch on, but we're going to talk more about this when we get to the reproductive section. Growth and development is going to be controlled by hormones. So just the fact that you have grown in height, muscles have developed, all of those things are communicated by a hormone. So why you go through kind of growth spurts and things like that is released by a hormone. So this happens once you're in adulthood, not really that important anymore, but throughout kind of before you're fully grown, it's very important. These are kind of the day-to-day things that happen. So all these last three are the day-to-day ones. So we have maintenance of electrolytes. Remember, electrolytes are kind of those ions. So major electrolytes that we talk about are sodium, potassium, calcium, and so on. So maintenance or managing the levels of electrolytes in your blood is an important part, and hormones play a role. Water balance is another really important thing. So you don't want to get dehydrated. Your body loves water. It's majority made of water. Your blood needs water, so everywhere water needs to happen. So we have a hormone that's going, or multiple hormones that are going to help in your water balance. Nutrient balance is going to be other. So glucose is going to be a major nutrient balance that we'll talk about. Regulation of metabolism in the cells and energy balance is going to be another thing. So cells being able to make ATP, do their chemical reactions that need to happen for them to function, all going to be controlled by hormones. And also, we talked about the immune system already, but getting kind of the immune system ready to go can be communicated through hormones as well. Just looking at it again, exocrine glands are things that you talked about, especially in the integumentary system. So exocrine glands are non-hormonal, so they're producing things like sweat is a major one, saliva is another one. All of these glands have ducts. So they are secretions made in the gland area, and they have a tube or pipe system that goes up, and usually they have a duct or some sort of or pore to release it. So they'll have a piping system that'll take their secretion to where certain area. So this instant will be the skin. If it was saliva, it'd be in the mouth. Endocrine glands produce the hormones, so they secrete hormones, but they don't have ducts. They secrete directly into the bloodstream. So you have the gland, there's a capillary, release the hormones, goes right into the capillary and goes along the way because it's circulating the bloodstream. Doesn't matter, sweat is going to be on the surface of the skin, saliva is going to be in your mouth. You don't need, that's more local effect. Hormones go into the bloodstream to have a diffuse or kind of long effect. Just looking at the endocrine glands, so we're going to talk about most of these. The hypothalamus is going to be your major kind of control center because remember, you learned about this in the brain, but we're going to talk about it again as an endocrine organ because it is a neuroendocrine organ. Because it is technically part of the nervous system, brain, but it produces hormones and is part of the endocrine system. So this is going to be part of hormones. So it's both, a mix. Pituitary gland is going to be another controlling factor, part of the brain. Pineal gland we'll mention. Thyroid's going to be a major one, base of your neck. Parathyroid kind of already touched on when we talked about the skeletal system. Thymus already talked about a little bit, at least with the lymphatic system. We are going to mention the adrenals, and we're going to talk about the pancreas a couple times in the semester. This is the first time with its, because it's a mixed gland as well, where it's endocrine and exocrine. So there's areas that are dependent on or make hormones, and there's also areas that release into a duct and digestive component. Testes in males and ovaries in females are going to be endocrine glands. We're going to touch on those, but we're going to talk more about them when we get to the reproductive system. So looking at hormones, they are what we call powerful because a lot of times you don't need a lot of the hormone in the bloodstream to have a significant effect. So these glands are releasing a little bit of hormone, it's going to its target, and it's having kind of a major effect. Again, endocrine gland right into the bloodstream. Now, a major component of hormones is not only being able to release the actual hormones, but we also need the proper receptors on the target cells. So, if you do not have the hormones released, well, then that's going to be a problem. But also, if you don't have the proper receptors to accept the hormones to communicate, and these can be either extracellular or intracellular, we'll talk more about that later, then you're not going to have an effective hormone. So you need both the hormone chemical and the receptor to receive it to have its effect. So that's how it's going to have an effect on the target cells. Again, it's long lasting. And a major component is maintaining homeostasis. Most, the only one that we're going to talk about that's not regulated by negative feedback is oxytocin, but most are regulated by negative feedback because they're trying to maintain homeostasis. So you look at things like sodium. So you eat a really salty meal, you absorb a lot of the sodium, well, then you don't want that much. So you're going to get rid of it. You'll urinate it out, you may not absorb as much, you'll try to get rid of it to get back to that level. If you're not eating enough salt for whatever reason, you're in super low salt diet and you actually body needs it, then it's going to absorb more, it's going to not urinate it out, it's going to keep as much to get back to its regular normal kind of level. So it's not, again, remember, it's not negative meaning it's bad, it's just returning back to our normal state. And we define hormones either as steroid, and that means it's fat soluble, or non-steroid, meaning it's water soluble. And that's going to have a difference on whether it can go into the cell for an intracellular receptor, or if it needs to stay on the outside because it can't go through the plasma membrane. Because remember, we have the phospholipid bilayer and we have all these fatty acid tails. So water soluble molecule is going to come down and it's going to be rejected. A fat soluble will just kind of travel right through. So if it's fat soluble, it's going to go intracellular. If so, the receptors will be inside the cell or inside the nucleus. Water soluble is going to have an extracellular receptor, or it's actually going to be on the plasma membrane. So the receptors will be part of the plasma membrane. So that's going to be a major factor of kind of how it works because these work differently. Different types of amino acids can be the water soluble type of hormones. So they can be either amino acid derivatives, meaning they can be kind of different versions of amino acids, kind of mix a little bit up. So it's not the exact amino acid, but similar. Peptides, where you have a chain of amino acids. So it's going to be a smaller chain that it's not large enough that it's a protein. Some can be small proteins, but a lot of them can be just amino acid chains or kind of derivatives of fats or lipids. Amino acid example is thyroid hormones. They are going to be weird, and we'll talk about them, that they have a carrier so they can actually go intracellular, even though they're a water soluble hormone. So we'll talk about that later. Catecholamines are going to be ones that you can see the names before because they do act as neurotransmitters when they're in part of the nervous system, but they can also, if they're in the bloodstream, act as hormones. So catecholamines, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine are going to be catecholamines. These guys are going to be made by the middle layer of the adrenal gland. So we'll talk about that. So the adrenal medulla, so we're going to have a cortex and a medulla. So the cortex is going to be the outer side that has multiple hormones that it's produced in the layers. And then the middle or the medulla is going to be epinephrine and norepinephrine because it's directly connected to the sympathetic nervous system. Tryptophan derivatives is going to be melatonin. We'll see that when we briefly talk about the pineal gland. So peptide hormones are most often the hormones of the body. Again, they can be short polypeptide chains, so just kind of a short chain of amino acids, but they can also be small proteins, meaning that they are just barely above the threshold that makes them a protein. You can also have glycoproteins. So remember that is going to be a polypeptide. So, or kind of a protein where it gets there, amino acids, and then it has a carbohydrate off to the side. So it's going to have a sugar on the protein. Examples of glycoproteins are actually some that are released by the anterior pituitary. You're going to see these guys, anterior pituitary. TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. We'll talk more about that later. LH is luteinizing hormone, and FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. Both of these are part of the reproductive system. So we're going to touch on them, but we're going to talk more significantly when we get to the reproductive.